The redwood tree, an incredible and majestic beauty. A walk through the redwood forest is truly a sight to behold. The tree may seem indestructible, and yet this is not quite so. It may be able to withstand forest fires, and it may be able to live for 1,000 years, and yet not indestructible. 95% of old-growth redwood forest has been decimated from the planet. We'll get to that. But first, we should talk about all the nature that abounds in the unique and diverse redwood forest habitat. Part 1. Ecology. The redwood forest is a unique habitat for many plants and animals. The leveled canopy and hollowed areas in logs and trees are good examples of this. One specific type of hollowed log is a goose pen. A goose pen is a hollowed tree that makes a sort of cave. This cave is often hauled out by fire damage or fungus damage. Many animals use this unique feature of the coast redwood habitat. For example, bats use it as a good roosting spot, and bears may use it for comfy and sheltered sleeping. Several animals completely rely on the redwood forest, but many animals also live elsewhere in the world. Some animals that rely on redwoods only partially are animals like deer and bears. This does not mean that no animals do not rely completely on the unique habitat. For example, Roosevelt elk are greatly endangered due to the different qualities of second growth versus old growth coast redwood forests. Other animals exclusive to the forests are marbled murrelets, banana slugs, and spotted owls. The marbled murrelet spends most of its time fishing far out on the ocean during the day, and the spotted owl hunts in the forest around dusk. Part 2. History. Early redwood ancestors date back to the Cretaceous period, maybe even the late Jurassic. Early Sequoia sempervirens fossils appear as early as the early Tertiary. Redwoods are conifers, one of the earliest divisions or phylums of trees to evolve. This means redwoods' close ancestors date back to the age of the dinosaurs. Part 3. Native Americans. Native Americans saw redwoods as important and majestic creatures and used them in non-harmful ways. The only redwood wood they used was from trees that had already fallen. Native Americans used coast redwoods in many ways. Some Native Americans split wood from downed logs into planks for shelters. Some made dugout canoes through a combination of controlled fire and scraping tools, and some stripped fiber off redwood bark for basket weaving, among other things. Part 4. Early logging. As soon as Europeans arrived in the West, the value of redwood wood to them as a commodity spread quite quickly. They started cutting down trees almost immediately. Redwood trees have a very large trunk, much larger than most trees, so Europeans could not cut down many of the large redwoods they encountered originally, but they could produce enough wood to supply the demand. As time wore on, new tools were developed that better suited cutting redwood trees. The gold rush in the 1800s brought even more demand for the precious, valuable hardwood, prompting a new logging technique, clear cutting. The way clear cutting works is simple and intuitive. Cut every tree in an acre, except for 4. At first, as I aforementioned, this was not easy or simple, but over time, technology advanced enough with things like motorized saws so that clear cutting was much more feasible and a better business practice. Although mostly no longer practiced, clear cutting has made a devastating impact on the redwood forests of our planet. Now, the 1800s may have been an eventful century for logging, but it was almost nothing compared to what was to come. Part 5. The early 1900s. At the beginning of the 20th century, a devastating thing happened. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake. You may be surprised to learn that it caused a boom in the redwood industry. The 1906 earthquake caused devastating fire all through San Francisco. Many buildings were completely destroyed, although some buildings fared better than others. Redwood has fire resistance, and so buildings made of it survived at a higher ratio. This caused many people rebuilding to choose redwood wood so they would be better prepared in light of another fire. The Great Depression caused a large decrease in the logging industry, fading away many small companies and consolidating the industry to bigger corporations. Then World War II happened. Part 6. The mid-1900s. As World War II came to a close, there were several developments in the logging industry. First, several developments from the war, like various amphibious vehicles, could apply to the logging industry. For example, logging tractors were greatly improved. Second, it was becoming clear the majestic trees were not to last forever, and then the logging companies would be out of business. So, an association of logging companies formed to figure out how to sustain the redwood logging industry. Over many years, they tested different techniques, and in general, did tests to figure out the best way to log sustainably. That commission determined that, as opposed to reseeding the clear-cutted areas, selective harvesting was a better way to keep the industry alive. But they were still cutting down the old-growth redwoods. Part 7. The Conservation Era. Before logging businesses switched to selective harvesting, once logging companies had gone through an area, most of the redwood forest there was gone. All that was left was maybe a few younger trees. So over and through the 20th century, saving redwoods became a priority to many. Several redwood state parks were established. Alas, the support for a national park in Congress was few and far between. Eventually, after several decades of hard lobbying by organizations and ordinary people, Redwood National Park was drafted and signed into law in 1968. But originally, Redwood National Park was not large, so in 1978, an expansion for the national park was signed into law. All of this conservation did not stop logging companies, though, and from roughly the 1950s to the 1970s, 1 million board feet of redwood lumber was produced every year. As more and more land with some of the last old-growth redwoods was brought into public property, maintaining and doing research on that land became a priority. Much was learned about the redwood forest in this time, roughly the 90s to now, and much will continue to be learned in the future. Clear cutting is banned in many California counties, and the last old-growth redwoods have been protected on public lands. Under a century ago, the redwoods were on track for extinction and to be just a memory of the past. So remember the long history of the coast redwoods.